If you're working on a V4, you'll find the long drill bit handy because it can bend around this coolant tube. Now thread the 4mm self-tapping screw into the plug and pull out the plug. And this is important. Remember to install new plugs after adjusting the screws. It's federal law. New plugs are now available from American Honda. You can order them by their code number, HC128703. Inspect the low-speed screws of all the carburetors for wear or damage. Pay special attention to the screw's taper. If any one of the screws is worn or damaged, replace it. When removing the low-speed mixture screws, you might have difficulty also removing their washers and O-rings. A paper clip bent this way is a good tool for getting them out of the carburetor. And finally, when installing new low-speed screws, be sure to install the spring, washer, and O-ring in their proper order. Okay, that's the diagnostic sequence. First, determine the complaint. Then test ride to verify the symptoms. Next, use the quick checks to eliminate other possibilities. Then use leaked out and spark gap tests to focus even tighter on the complaint. And remember to use the emissions tech line before you take the carburetors apart. After viewing this section, you'll know some important carburetor parts differences, how to clean carburetor low-speed circuits, precise float level and synchronizing techniques, plus a quick and accurate idle drop procedure. Most V-engine carburetors can be completely cleaned while still attached to the airbox. This is good because original linkage adjustments stay undisturbed. Clean carburetor low-speed circuits are essential for good throttle response and idling. Here's a quick and efficient way to clean them. These 4 tiny bypass circuit holes in the carburetor throat can get clogged during winter storage or by contaminated fuel. This is how they're cleaned. With the mixture screw in its hole, turn the screw in all the way and gently bottom it. If you're not careful, the screw and its seat will be damaged. Next, remove the low-speed jet. Now, with the throttle plates opened slightly, spray cleaner directly into the low-speed jet hole and follow with compressed air. You should see vapor coming from the 4 bypass holes in the carburetor throat. And this is the last step. Turn the low-speed screw out a few turns, then spray carburetor cleaner into the low-speed jet hole. You should see vapor coming from the idle mixture port in the floor of the carburetor. So that's how it's done. And the other carburetor circuits are cleaned in a similar manner. And finally, be sure to always wear safety goggles when working with carburetor cleaner. It's a powerful solvent and could hurt your eyes. Now, let's talk about what makes each type of Honda carburetor special. It's no secret that Honda makes many different carburetors to meet today's varied requirements. Some of these differences are obvious, while others are more subtle. And remember this tip. When disassembling these carburetors, work on one at a time to avoid swapping parts. Some parts look the same, but are really different. Here are some things you should know. Let's start with the V4 carburetors. While the same basic casting is used, the front carburetors are downdrafts and the rear units are side drafts. But that's not all. The vacuum piston springs in the front carburetors are longer than those in the rear. This is the case with most, but not all, Honda V4s. And when assembling the carburetors, be sure to install the front and rear emulsion tubes in their proper carburetors, because they're not always identical. Also, in just about all V4 models, the main jets are of different sizes. Jet needle sizes can vary too. So when reassembling V4 carburetors, make sure that each needle is in its proper carburetor. For example, these are front and rear jet needles from a 1982 Sabre. These parts are different because the fuel levels are different in the front and rear carburetors. Fuel in the rear carburetor has to rise farther to get to the venturi, and the different main jet and needle compensate for this. Remember too that some carburetor parts for California bikes are different from those for the other states. Parts designated AC on the microfiche are for California motorcycles, and those designated A are for the other 49 states. And here's a magnet tip. When choke cable free play is insufficient, the choke valves can't shut properly, so the engine may stall in traffic or have a slow return to idle. Simple adjustment corrects this. Also, take special care not to lose the needle jet. It can fall out when the emulsion tube is removed. The GL1200 and CR series carburetors are the exceptions here because they have pressed-in needle jets. But if the needle jet does fall out, be sure to reinstall it right side up. Simply match the convex lower side of the jet with the concave top of the emulsion tube. The carburation differences you've seen are important, but they aren't the only differences you'll find in your work. So to do a good job, always refer to your shop manual or tech line when in doubt. After cleaning, you should check and, if necessary, adjust the float level of each carburetor as it is assembled. Here are some tips about float level adjustment. Honda's V4s are quite sensitive to float adjustment, particularly those with float bowls vented to the airbox. The shop manual tells you how to check float level, and this will make the job easier. Use a vernier caliper to set the height on the Honda float gauge. The caliper has smaller increments and allows more precise measuring with the float gauge. Also, remember that float level is measured with the carburetor on its side, with no compression on the float valve spring. This is important because it allows consistent and precise measuring of float height. And remember this, when setting float level on V4 carburetors, measure float height at the short side of the float pivot. The float is off-center, and you can measure its height better on the short side. And finally, V4 carburetors are sensitive to synchronization too, so follow your manual closely here. This is the base carburetor. It can't be synchronized, but all the other carburetors are synchronized to it. You can tell the base carburetor in a multi-carb system. It is the only one with an idle speed adjustment screw. And this will make things easier when using vacuum gauges to adjust V4 carburation. Calibrate all 4 gauges at one vacuum source before synchronizing the carburetors. These gauges are being calibrated at the manifold vacuum port of the number 1 cylinder. The last adjustment to make is the idle drop procedure. This involves adjusting the low-speed screws using a recommended tachometer to achieve the optimum setting for best carburetor response and cleanest running. And in case you had any doubts, a properly done idle drop procedure yields results as good as any exhaust gas analyzer. Now here are some basics for the idle drop procedure. The first step is to put all 4 low-speed screws at the initial setting specified in the manual. Next, attach the tachometer to the warmed-up power plant. Start the engine, adjust the sensitivity control of the tach if it has one, and set idle speed to specifications. Next, turn all low-speed screws out 1/2 turn and see if engine speed rises. If it doesn't, don't turn them any farther. If engine speed rises 50 RPM or more, reset the idle speed and keep turning all 4 low-speed screws a 1/2 turn at a time until engine speed stops rising. Then reset idle speed. Now, move on to the number 1 carburetor. Slowly turn the low-speed screw in, but stop turning it when idle speed has dropped the specified amount from peak idle RPM. In your final step, you'll turn the screw outward from this position. The exact number of turns varies with each model, and your shop manual has the specifications. Repeat these steps for the other carburetors. So these are the key points of cleaning and adjusting Honda carburetors. Keep all the circuits clear and clean. Be aware of parts differences that affect service. Know the importance of carburetor synchronization and float levels. And remember that the idle drop procedure is a simple, effective tuning method. Well, that about covers it for the new generation of carburetors from Honda. Sure, some may look a little unconventional, and others kind of complicated. But remember that these carburetors work according to the same physical laws as any other fuel system. And remember, too, that modern fuel systems are designed to make your life simpler, not more complicated. As a matter of fact, considering the many benefits provided by these clean-burning carburetors, it looks like things will be better for just about everybody.